Sunday Quinn. I stayed home with Willie Saturday night and we watched World War Z and then had a Mario Kart marathon until I felt bug-eyed and useless. It was good to escape into his world for a while because after we walked Jill home, I was still stuck in my head and it wasn't fair to Willie. But Sunday was different. Ma came home, napped for a couple hours, made her marshmallow pie that everyone in the world loves but me because marshmallows taste like little chunks of chewy soap. And then the three of us went down the block to the Galuzos. We arrived late. The house was already packed. A couple of the younger neighborhood kids sat on the stairs that overlooked the front hall and the living room. Each one had a hyper-colored plastic gun, and they pretended to shoot the group of guys in the living room watching the Pats play the Broncos on TV. It was the afternoon game, but it was already in the second quarter. They were screaming at what should have been a pass interference that hadn't been called. "Boys!" Ma yelled into the room. I almost laughed at how quickly the room full of grown men snapped to attention when they heard Ma. A moment passed. Then Guzzo's dad shouted back, "Marshmallow pie!" Everyone cheered. "Nice to see you too, Richie," Ma said. We walked into the kitchen and she put that pie on the counter. Mrs. Galuzzo hugging us all hello. Out the window, I could see the small backyard, the porch. It was packed too. It looked like half the neighborhood had shown up. Willie scrambled off to find some kids his own age down in the basement where they usually played video games, and I headed outside. But I gotta admit, I felt weird. The Galuzos had always been my second home, but as I moved through the kitchen toward the back porch, I felt oddly slow and awkward, like I was wading through a pool of water. As soon as I stepped onto the porch, I saw him. Paul. My stomach clenched. He was flipping burgers at the grill. A red bandana tied up over his head. Ratty t-shirt, even in this cool November weather. Guzzo stood right beside him. Two brothers side by side. Man, I'd never really taken in how huge they were, like they could have squatted, pitched forward, and put their knuckles in the dirt, and they'd be the linemen I just saw wearing Pats and Broncos uniforms. They waved, and I waved back, but was instantly wondering if Guzzo had said anything to his brother about the other night. It bugged me not knowing. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to keep quiet about it, or if I was supposed to head over and slap Paul on the back. It did feel like this party was thrown together all of a sudden for him. Why else were we all there? Paul didn't live here, and yet he stood there at the grill like he was at the helm or something, and the whole party radiated out in front of him. Paul prodded the burgers, and I saw that Jill was on the porch too. She was sitting on the railing, leaning against the post in the corner, watching Dwyer shoot hoops in the driveway. I joined her in the corner, sitting on the railing, facing her in the yard behind her, where I could see Guzzo nudging Paul and pointing at me. "You think you all really have a chance this year?" Jill asked me, nodding toward the basketball. Of course she'd go there first. That was all anybody wanted to talk about. "Everybody else does," I said. She turned and looked at me. "That make you nervous?" "I keep hearing this voice in the back of my head," I said, hoping I didn't sound like a friggin' crazy person. "It's pushing me, you know, like go, 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 but what I really hear is, don't F it up." "Coach putting pressure on you?" she asked. That wasn't even half of it. Coach Carney and his plans were drilled into me. We'd had our warm-up practices the week before. The first serious preseason practices began on Monday. Everyone knew we had a great team this year. People were even talking about it in the press, wanting to know how far we'd go. Semifinals, finals, but all we cared about was who is going to be a starter. That's who the scouts would focus on, the guys with serious playing time. But it wasn't the team that bothered me. It was the press. I'd already seen Coach Carney doing interviews left and right, getting all excited like some clown at the carnival. I was sure we'd see more of them too. It had been a long time since we'd had a team with a shot at being ranked number 1 in the state, and even though there were only 15 players, 3 coaches, and a part-time trainer, it felt like we were chasing the trophy for thousands of people. But right then, I decided I was only going to concentrate on one person, Jill. So I just said, "Not too bad," and she nodded, and it was kind of impossible not to watch the light shift in the highlights in her hair. There were other people on the porch, but nobody was listening to us. So here's something, I don't know, weird. You know how the cops came to the party the other night, she said? Yeah. Well, no one got busted. The cops broke up the party, shook a few guys down looking for pot, but not finding any, and they just made me send everyone away, made me stand there in the hall and watch everyone leave. They made me call my parents. It was so embarrassing. She leaned in closer. But what was worse, they stood there in the front hall looking at me, waiting for my folks to come home after everyone else had left, and one of them, I don't even know his name, but he obviously knew I was Polly's cousin. He kept looking at me like he was disgusted. Finally, he pointed at me and said, "Don't F this up for your family." Did you get in any kind of trouble? No, Jill said skeptically. I thought he was going to call Polly, but he didn't. He just said that, waited for my parents, and when they got home, he left. Nothing else happened. It was just like I said, weird. Mr. Galuzzo pushed open the screen door to yell out to Paul, "Hey, it's almost halftime. We got a room full of guys gonna come running out here for burgers soon." Just as Dad shouting to him seemed to pull the whole yard closer, pulled me closer to him. I looked past Jill's shoulder to Guzzo and Paul. They were still at the grill, Paul with the spatula in one hand. "I get a day off and all you do is put me to work?" he yelled back to his dad. He laughed. "Don't worry," he said, raising his hand in the air, the spatula his scepter. "I got this." Paul was famous for his burgers. He made them himself, and even while the burger itself was still juicy, the bits of onion inside stayed nice and crunchy. They were my favorite, better than anything Ma ever made. Mr. Galuzzo poked his head back into the house to tell folks that the burgers would be ready in a minute, but someone shouted to him to come see some play Brady made, and he left the porch and let the door slam behind him. "I think I know why they couldn't call Paul," I said to Jill. She gave me a go-on look, then added carefully, "Yeah, I saw something on the news." "I saw it happen." "What?" Jill bent forward and grabbed my wrist. I could hear the rubbery echo of the ball pounding in the driveway, the chatter from some of the neighbors in the backyard, the rattle of a bag filled with bottles being moved through the kitchen inside. I shifted closer to her on the railing. "Me and Guzzo and Dwyer were at Jerry's before your party," I told her, voice low. "I saw it. I saw Paul and that kid." "It was Rashad, Quinn. That's who Paul arrested. You know Rashad. He goes to our school. He's tight with English and those guys." "Ugh," I said. In fact, as soon as she said it, I could picture him, hanging with English in the halls. ROTC dude, right? Shit. I felt like such an ass. I'd quickly convinced myself I had no idea who that kid with Paul was that night. And yeah, there were like 1,000 kids in each grade at school or whatever, but I did know him. Or know of him, really. I'd seen him, Rashad, in that uniform, and it made me think of my dad wearing his own at college. How my dad had looked proud in all those pictures. Jill cocked her head in disbelief. "You all just watched it go down?" Guzzo and Dwyer were waiting in the alley, but I was there. I glanced around all paranoid, making my voice even lower. It was ugly. I don't know what Rashad did, but Paul kicked the shit out of him. "I heard someone talking about it earlier," Jill said, scooching closer. "They said he was resisting arrest. I guess. Did Paul, see you or anything?" I hesitated. "I don't know," I said. It felt weird to talk about any of this, as if by mentioning it at all, I was betraying Paul. I looked over to him and Guzzo, as if reading their faces might tell me what they were thinking, or whether Guzzo had said anything. "I don't think he saw me," I said, turning back to Jill. "I doubt it." "Did Guzzo? What? Tell him?" We were hunched so close together at this point that when I heard my name shouted out, it felt like someone dropped an ice cube down the back of my shirt. "Hey, Quinn." It was Paul. "Why don't you quit hitting on my cousin and come help me serve these burgers?" I froze. The timing scared the hell out of me. It was as if he knew I'd just been talking about him. Jill spun around and yelled, "Go flip your own burgers, Paul." "What does that even mean?" he asked. He and Guzzo laughed. "I don't know," Jill said, turning back to me. "But better than say nothing." Jill never took shit, never let anyone get the jump on her. I always figured it was because she was used to being the only girl in a huge group of guys. There were 11 Galuzzo cousins, and she was the only female. And she just wouldn't let them tease her. Or if they did, she decided long ago that she sure as hell was going to make it through the gauntlet regardless. I, however, wasn't as used to it. In fact, I must have looked stupid with nerves because her eyes stayed glued to me as I got up and told her I'd catch up with her later, and as I turned, she smiled, and I felt the air leave me in a rush because I wanted to take her by the hand and get the hell out of there, but I couldn't. Quinn, Paul again. Then Guzzo, Quinn. Then Guzzo began a slow clap, and he and Paul chanted my name louder and louder as I crossed over to them, and I was sure even folks in the neighborhood who weren't already at that party could hear them. Dude, Guzzo said when I reached them, you have no chance. Like you know anything about chances. Damn right, Paul said, grinning at me. Shut up, Guzzo said. Paul ignored him. He had a bottle of beer in his left hand, and he held out that fist to bump knuckles with me, and I did. What's up, Quinn? He said. You don't say hello anymore? He took a swig of beer and wiped his mouth on the sleeve of his t-shirt. That's when I noticed his right fist was stuffed into a bucket of ice water on the grill shelf beside him, all casual. Friggin' hell, he had scabs all over his knuckles, like nursing his wounds from Friday night. Right there in front of everybody at the barbecue was NBD. What's up? I asked. He tossed the empty beer bottle into a cardboard box near his feet. Hold this, he said, handing me a faded plastic tray. He squeezed the juice from a couple of burgers with the spatula, sending frames up around them. I know the O'Reillys like 'em dried out, he said. He pressed again, charring them more. Make sure they know which ones are theirs. He pulled his swollen fist from the ice bucket, blessed the fingers, then stuck it back in. Seriously, man, he said to me, were you ever going to get your ass over here? It's a party, I said. People mingle. I just got here. Jesus, what's the matter with you? Nothing's the matter, Guzzo snapped. Why are you getting so defensive? What are you talking about? Look, Paul interrupted. He cut the air between us with the spatula. A drop of grease landed on my t-shirt. He pulled his wet hand from the bucket and pinched at the spot, pulling off as much of the grease as he could. What's the hell the matter with you two? Nothing, I said, but I wasn't sure. I kept trying to read his face or Guzzo's for some sign. Still not knowing if Guzzo had said anything to Paul was starting to eat away at me. Guzzo wouldn't meet my eyes, but Paul did. Listen, he said, I'm not kidding. You guys need to have a mind meld or something. If you keep bitching at each other like this into the season, you aren't going to play well. You're going to suck. So strap on a pair and get your shit together. I nodded, and Guzzo did too. It was always like that. Paul would give us marching orders, and we'd march, especially with basketball. Way I see it, Paul continued, if the whole team moves off the ball, and if you can get English to give it up more, you all have a real shot. Everyone else relies on 2, maybe 3 players at most. You've got 8 or 9 solid players, right? English's been working on his range, I said. He's going to shoot all he can. He's going to break his record from last year. You all should, Paul said. That's my point. He started scraping burgers up off the grill and dropping them on the platter. They better have the fixings ready in the kitchen, Guzzo said. Why don't you go find out, Paul said. Guzzo was about to protest, but Paul spoke over him. Seriously, Paul said before shouting out, Burgers up! Guzzo jogged ahead while I waited for Paul to slide the last burgers onto the pile. As soon as he did, I started to follow Guzzo, but Paul grabbed my arm. His blue eyes were red-rimmed and tired. I'm going to have a few days free, he told me. We should work on your footwork. We'll get a little in today. You come by after practice tomorrow, too. I'll be here. Yeah, I said, but he kept holding my arm longer than he needed to, until it was obviously awkward. You all right? He asked. You seem a little uptight. What's up? Burgers, I said, way too chipper. Nobody wants them cold. I could feel his eyes on me as I carried them up to the kitchen, and I could still feel the pressure of his fingertips like a ring around my elbow. I made a point of eating in the living room with the guys watching the game. The game was a good distraction, a way to pay attention to something else, to try to take my mind off Paul squinting at me, his gauging me as he'd been talking to me at the grill. He'd been all smiles, all business as usual, and despite the swollen hand in the bucket and the shredded knuckles, he'd been waving to people across the yard like there wasn't a damn thing on his mind other than serving them their burgers. And while I kept seeing Paul's Popeye arms at the back of Rashad's neck, Nobody else seemed to be wondering about why the Galuzos felt the sudden need for a party. No one else was talking about the fact that Paul was in the news. Instead, they all yelled at the TV when the Pats blew a 25-yard pass with another flag for holding. They yelled again after the Pats recovered from a sack and on the 3rd and 18 scored a touchdown. I yelled along with them. It was just easier. Guzzo came in and out of the room a few times, but it felt like he was keeping his distance from me, hovering around his brother, when Paul would come in to check on the score. But the game wasn't distracting enough. When I tried to swallow the burger down, it felt like I had an animal trying to crawl up and out of my throat. So after a while, I wandered into the kitchen, wondering where Jill was, and I found her there fighting with her mom in the corner. They were going at it about Friday night's party, right there in front of everyone. "I'm not kidding, young lady," Jill's mom said, cramping a cigarette between 2 fingers and waving it in front of Jill. "This is serious. The Royals are still screaming at us because of the last party. This is it. You've really blown it this time." All right, I got it," Jill said, standing like she was ready to fight or run, whichever she needed. "Can we not do this here?" Her mother leaned back and drew a big breath, as if to collect herself. "And one more thing," she finally said. "You can't expect Polly to just be there to save you all the time." "Oh my God, I don't." Mrs. Galuzzo had been half-heartedly rinsing off a few of the now empty platters with my mother, but when she heard Paul's name, she swung around. "You do," Jill's mom continued, "and he's got bigger and better things to worry about than his little cousins screwing around." "You're right, he does," Jill said under her breath, but everyone heard her. "Hey," Mrs. Galuzzo interrupted, her face going all tight and pissed. "You watch what you say next." She stepped away from the sink. Everyone else in the room went quiet, and Jill had gone deep red. "You may have a little respect today in my house. Today." The platter in her hand shook, and my mother put a hand on Mrs. Galuzzo's back to calm her. "That's what I was trying to say," Jill's mom said, stepping closer to Mrs. Galuzzo. "I mean, he has an important job." She fumbled for more words, then turned back to Jill. "See what you've done? You apologize to your Aunt Rita right now." "I'm sorry," Jill said automatically. "You're always sorry," her mom added bitterly, before sucking on her cigarette. "Honey," Mrs. Galuzzo said to Jill, her face softening, "Paul has a hard job, and sometimes he has to make tough decisions. All I'm saying is, please respect that and who he is." "Yes," Jill said, but she wasn't looking at Mrs. Galuzzo. She was looking at Paul, who was looking in through the screen door. "Thanks, Ma," he said. "Oh, Polly," Mrs. Galuzzo said, whirling around. She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't have the words for it. And as we were all waiting to hear what she would say next, we heard something else. The TV. It was turned up so loud for the game that when there was a break and the news anchor's voice set up the teaser for the evening news, we all heard it in the kitchen. Tune in tonight for the latest updates to this developing story as our experts analyze the shocking video released today of Officer Paul Galuzzo's arrest of Rashad Butler. Suddenly, the TV went mute. Someone in the living room must have found the remote, but it didn't matter. It was too late. The kitchen was so silent, I could hear my pulse in my ears, pumping red-hot, burning blood into my face. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't move, but I wasn't alone. No one did. We might have stayed like that, frozen in time, but Mr. Galuzzo busted into the kitchen from the living room in a kind of frantic waddle, holding a spread of dirty paper plates in his hands. "Hey, maybe we need to get some more burgers going," he sort of stuttered, more nervous than I'd ever heard him. But he stopped short as he looked around the shocked crowd in the kitchen. "Well, I'm not making any more right now," Paul said from the doorway, staring back at his dad. Yes, of course, I just mean, look," Paul told his dad, interrupting him. "Take it easy." He sighed, but then he lifted his head and glanced around the kitchen through the screen door. "Let's just say it. There's going to be more of this press. It's going to look ugly, but everything is going to be just fine. This just comes with the job. I'll be all right." He remained on the porch, but he leaned forward, his thick arms going up on either side of the doorframe. "But yeah," he added, "I do need everyone to stick by me, especially family." Everyone immediately started saying how they supported him, and he nodded and smiled, but was looking past all the women to me. You too, Quinn, he added. Right now. I need your ass out here on the court for a little 2-on-2. I was so freaked out it was a friggin' relief just to be given an order. Okay, I said dumbly, and I swear there were a few faces in the room, including my own Ma's and Mrs. Galuzzo, who looked at me with a swelling pride, as if he just asked me to saddle up and join the posse on the hunt for some ruthless criminal, and I was putting down my farming tools to go join the greater cause. I passed Jill on my way to the porch, and I tapped her elbow as I walked by. She could hold her own better than anyone I knew, but I wanted to let her know she wasn't alone, because at least Jill was strong enough to actually say what I was only thinking. Maybe everyone else at the party was nervous for Paul, but I was nervous about him, especially as I followed him down to the driveway. 2-on-2, Paul said. All rebounds are offensive. After a basket, you gotta make 3 passes before you take another shot. Got it? He waved his thumb between Guzzo and himself. Galuzzo's against you two dumbasses. The dumbasses were me and Dwyer, of course. They gave us the ball first, and from the first drive, I knew it was going to be a physical game. I didn't shoot. I just dribbled and kept Paul slapping at my forearm and side. He taught me to dribble, a little too well. Guzzo's too big to try to take him to the hoop, but he took my bait, so I got the lane plugged with both Galuzzo's and Dwyer popped out back by the top of the key. I got him the ball with a no-look pass, and he made the shot. Get your ass in action, Paul told his brother. This went on for a while, and then the game got rougher. The score stayed close, but none of us could hope to out-rebound Guzzo, so they made more points off our missed shots than they could make on their own. Their driveway is narrow, and the rest of the time, Paul and Galuzzo bumped us until we were backed up against one of the houses on either side. But while Paul's arms were as thick as my neck, I beat him off the dribble, and twice in a row, I got a foot around him and nailed fadeaway jumpers Guzzo couldn't block. This went on for a while, and the game got rougher. The score stayed close, but none of us could hope to out-rebound Guzzo, so they made more points off our missed shots than they could make on their own. Their driveway is narrow, and the rest of the time, Paul and Guzzo bumped us until we were backed up against one of the houses on either side. But while Paul's arms were as thick as my neck, I beat him off the dribble, and twice in a row I got a foot around him and nailed fadeaway jumpers Guzzo couldn't block. What, you think you're English now? Paul said to me. No. Paul put his hand in the air for us to stop. Wait, was that even 3 passes? Yeah, Dwyer said. You losing count, I laughed, trying to keep it light. But Paul didn't. We checked, and he came up all over me. If we'd had the full space of a real court, this would have made it easier to get around him, but in the driveway, he just kept bumping me back and back, until I was almost out to the sidewalk. The driveway sloped down, and I was in the street when Paul finally eased up. Where the hell are you going? I didn't answer. I just chucked the ball from the street. It wasn't a real shot, and I didn't think I could actually make it. I just wanted to watch it hit the rim and see what would happen. It hit the top of the backboard and bounced into the yard near the grill. What's up with that? Guzzo yelled. You gotta be tougher than that, Paul said to me. You can't give up. I'm just trying to help you, Quinn. You gotta keep your head in the game and nowhere else. You got that? Man, I said, this isn't a game. I brushed past him and walked up the driveway. I'm done, I said. Dwyer and Guzzo started to complain, but Paul's voice rose up over theirs. I'm just trying to help you, Quinn, like I always have. You remember that. How could I forget? I collected the ball from the yard and tossed it to Dwyer, then went inside. I said a quick goodbye to Mrs. Galuzzo and told Ma I'd meet her at home, then left through the front door, taking the steps 2 at a time, half expecting Paul to be there, blocking my path, reminding me how many times he'd been the one working with me in that same driveway, the one cheering me on from the stands of my middle school JV and now varsity basketball games, the one who taught me how to angle the blade beneath my chin when I shaved. But he wasn't there. He was back under the basket with Guzzo and Dwyer, showing Dwyer how to get a leg around a man bigger than him, the same move I used on him moments before.